This is the Humans of Gaming podcast, an open and honest conversation about games, life, and belief.
Hello, I'm your host, Drew Dixon. I'm the editor-in-chief, and I'm joined as always, by our most prolific writer, M. Joshua Collar. Hey, M. Joshua, how are you?
I am super good. I'm glad to be here.
For the sake of our guest, I always call you M. Joshua, but for the sake of our guest,
just Josh.
I'm going to call
Josh
you
works.
Josh. Josh or Joshua.
Yeah.
Josh
squared
that away.
It's faster.
Yeah.
Less syllables.
So we have a really cool guest on the podcast today, and that is Rand Miller. Hey, Rand, how are you?
Great. You guys, I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah.
Awesome.
And so, Rand, people will know you, of course, from MYST and Riven. You kind of were the co-creators of those games with your brother. And then, of course, your recent release is Abduction, which has been a game that's gotten a lot of buzz this year as well. So tell us a little bit about yourself, kind of where you grew up and what that was like.
Well, let's see here. There's oh man, this could go on long. I'll summarize.
Yeah, just give us the cliff notes.
Yeah, when I got into computers, it was and computer games in particular, it was before you could have them in your house. So
Yeah.
You've
been making games since I've been playing games, which is a really dang long time. It
is.
I think your first credits that I was looking up says that you started making your first commercial release in '87. Is that accurate?
That's the first one with this company Cyan. So but even before then, like back in the 70s, I was writing games for time sharing machines. And,
oh wow!
Yeah,
Awesome.
I was. We lived. I think my junior high and high school years were in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and we lived in a spot where it was close to the University of New Mexico, and I could go essentially steal time on their mainframes by getting passwords out of trash cans, and and I did, and
awesome.
so
That's
where I
amazing.
got started. My tainted past of stealing passwords. Yeah.
Oh man, that's so cool.
Do you still steal passwords?
No, but I tend not to throw mine away either. Just so nobody will steal mine.
Oh yeah, I know. It's a thing we got to think about these days.
It was funny back then. It was a huge computer center. You can, like almost those stereotypical computer centers you see back in the day with lots of people in it, and there was just it was just like basically teletype machines printing out paper, and so when you typed in your password, just print it out, and then people who weren't very savvy of these things would just rip off their pages, throw them in the trash later, and it was very handy for a junior high kid like me.
That's great. That's hilarious. Well, so from what I've read about you in our conversations in the past, you have you grew up in the church. Is that right?
I did, yeah. So stealing passwords to play computer games is my technical background. My personal and or more personal background is my dad's a preacher, and so I ended up in Dallas at a really young age because he was going to seminary at the time, and then kind of have been in the church for a long time. Various phases of my spiritual evolution. Yeah. So, definitely grew up in the church.
Yeah. And so that's something you have persisted in. Like you're still a member of a church, still active. Still
And there's, this could be a long conversation because there's so much, I'm not young anymore. I don't feel old, but I look in the mirror and there's a guy with gray hair there. It's kind of weird. But I've been in the church all these years, and oddly enough, at this point, my brother actually is teaching at a church that's like really close to her office here, and I go to that one. Yeah, it's different from how I was raised, and I've evolved over the years.
Yeah.
And I've let go of a few things and changed a few things.
Can you give a few examples of that?
Oh my gosh.
Just one or two.
Yeah, we can dive right in. Well, yeah, I'll start off by saying this. My mom, she to this day says, regrets this or denies it or says, what was I thinking? But I remember at a very young age, her saying, you should never be afraid of the truth. You should always look for the truth because, why would you want to be afraid, of questioning and looking for the truth? And little did she know that I would really take that to heart. And to a certain extent, I mean, that gives you a little bit of freedom. Now it's weird. Okay, you guys know. Okay, so you're younger than I.
That obviously makes a lot of sense with your games, considering they're all about seeking and finding the truth.
Yeah, it's so true. I was going to say that in a weird way, and especially with MYST and now Abduction, where you don't know anything about those games. The first game in the series that you play, you really don't know anything. The goal is, well, I feel out of place here. I wonder how this works. I wonder what my place is in this story. I wonder what the deeper meaning is. I wonder if I can have an effect here. I mean, all those things that, in some ways, parallel.
Would you say that that's the core pitch, the core idea of Abduction in particular?
Yeah. I mean, in a lot of ways, I think what drives you is the same thing that drives you in life, or should. I mean, I feel like if you stop asking those questions, or and I don't want to insult anybody, but if you feel like you got it all figured out, maybe you should take another look, because it feels like things are more complicated than that. And just because you may have been raised a certain way or heard things a certain way or feel very comfortable in a certain way doesn't mean that you shouldn't stay open and consider other aspects of things. And I mean, that way in the games. And I think honestly, it serves you well in life too.
And so how did that affect your faith journey in terms of your relationship to your mom and her, the surprise to her of how you've taken that run with that?
Well, as much as it seems, and she would say, well, okay, so there's concrete examples, and then there's some interesting aspects of my journey. Let me just give you some other summaries of my journey that I think are unique.
Sure, go for it.
There's a lot of people, I think, who grow up in the church who start to see things that may not, that they were taught one way, and then life may throw some things at them that tend to, or at least from somebody's opinion, counteract those ideas. And they think that the things they were taught then are so integrated with truth, absolute truth, that then it's all wrong. And they throw out,
there's no pliability there.
Yeah, I love the term baby with the bathwater, because it feels like a lot of people are throwing away a lot of religious background, especially, from maybe Christianity. They're throwing the baby in the bathwater away.
And I gotta admit, I have a son now, so I know that how dirty baby bathwater can get, and how it's really important that if your son does something in the bathtub, that you should throw that water away, but definitely not the baby.
That's right. You kind of want to grab hold of the baby's arm and make sure he doesn't go down the drain. It can be important. So here's one example. This is more depending on how conservative your upbringings were. This one will be more or less controversial, but I was brought up with the 7-day creation, that was literal, and that and it was there weren't any other options, and that the age was kind of built in when God made.
It wasn't written by Hebrews who have a different definition of day and night and that sort of thing.
And if you compromise on that, that's just a stepping stone to compromising on every other doctrine in the Bible.
Yeah, exactly. I've seen these diagrams that has 7-day creation at the bottom of this of this thing that if it crumbles, then everything crumbles. And up above it is stuff like, marriage and relationships. And I remember thinking, wait, that seems not exactly right. That everything is based on that. But anyway, through the course of, my life, and I'm a slow learner, but I tend not to believe that anymore. And I know that there's, old Earth, and I remember hearing Hugh Ross for the first time, which was interesting. He's kind of a guy who first espoused that, oh, well, this could be still, 13 billion years. And like you said, the time frames were different, and it doesn't have to be a literal day. And I thought, well, that's kind of cool. And I think I've loosened up even more, where I am not afraid in any way of evolution as a process. And I kind of am amazed by it, to be honest with you. And I also am confused.
It's hard to study biology, especially like small ecosystems, without seeing change in biomes over time.
Right. And I know that there's micro and macro, and I understand, the arguments of irreducible complexity, and I understand everybody's comments on all those things. And I've read I've read Richard Dawkins, and I've read, Christian support of anti-evolution. And then when it comes down to it, to be honest with you, I think evolution is a great process. And if I was going to build the world the way it is, I think evolution is an incredible, system for making things happen, and explains a lot of things that I may not have been able to explain otherwise. And so the discussion with my mom is more of her saying now, oh my goodness, I don't know, you're searching for truth. I don't think I gave you that. And it's like, well, Mom, you did. And I'm going to believe a little bit differently than you here. And luckily, though, Mom, I don't think I've thrown out the baby with the bathwater, maybe because you told me that, I could seek truth, and you gave me that kind of freedom, which is, not a bad thing. I'm not sure she sees it that way but that's one example. And I kind of dig the fact that I'm not, in some ways, hemmed in by that now. In fact, I look at whether somebody believes in literal creation or evolution, and I think, well, if you're really going to battle on that, if you're really going to lock down and say that is a core component, then I think you may be missing some bigger points in some other areas.
Cool. If I can change a little bit of gear, I want to come back to this general kind of thought and what has changed with you in your formation. But I want to ask specifically about success. So you've had some games that are extremely well known and some that aren't so well known. And I don't want to ask so much about the ones that are lesser known, as much as I heard a statistic that MYST was the highest selling PC game up until The Sims came around in 2001, 2002, or what year that was. Does that sound accurate to you?
Yeah. It was up on the top of the charts for a long time, much to our surprise.
How did you process that experience, the extreme financial success of the game, and having a studio that has a breakout hit like that?
It's really weird. It's really, really weird. I grew up fairly, I guess we'd call it poor now. I didn't think it was poor then.
Middle class poor.
Yeah, and probably people would look at it as a little below. When we were in Dallas and my dad was in seminary, we lived in a single wide trailer in Dallas, and we didn't have leftovers when after dinner. It was 4 boys, and we didn't go hungry, but we weren't, I don't remember being really full.
Yeah.
So we cherished what we had. And so it was really weird when MYST started taking off, and suddenly your mind starts to change in weird ways that aren't healthy. They are not healthy, and they're really weird.
Like what?
I remember one time in particular. So, by the way, it was really weird because we didn't take a lot of money out of the company for a long time. We just thought, oh, well, the company has money and you use that to do more stuff, but you don't get it. And so, we still lived really conservatively and modestly for a long time.
Didn't have any leftovers?
Yeah, we did have leftovers.
Oh, okay.
And I do remember after MYST, I actually bought the first new car I ever bought, which was kind of cool. But then after a while, we started taking more out. And I remember having, essentially $1 million in the bank or more, a couple million even. And that's weird. And it's not weird. First of all, there's the abstract weird where it's like, yep, yeah. I've got that. I don't know what I'm going to do with it because I really haven't changed as a person, but it's sitting there. Mm-hmm. And then it's the part that starts to change you in weird ways. And I remember, this is going to seem really, really weird, but I remember being in a hardware store once. And now, remember, I've been shaped my whole life to be, be careful with your money, be frugal, save, be frugal, you don't just buy things. And here I am in the hardware store. And suddenly I find myself thinking, oh, I should just buy all the power tools here I could. And it's like something switched in my brain saying, you don't really have to think about what you want to buy or be frugal. You have enough money where you could just buy all this and have it and stick it in your house. And then if you ever need it, you could use it. Yeah. And it was a weird thing. It sounds so trivial, but it was a weird mindset that was a bit disconcerting to me. This doesn't feel right. This feels like it's a security level that's not healthy somehow.
Yeah, and that was connected to your faith upbringing, I imagine.
Well, I don't know. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's faith or habit or what, but I hope some of it was faith. I mean, faith is the part of me that I would like to say more of instead of wanting to spend on power tools, would have said, well, why don't you just give a lot of this away? That's the part that is kind of interesting and hard and easy and weird when you have money as well. We can touch on that. But this was more of neural pathways started to change in ways that feel healthy. There's something about being slightly insecure, as much as this is going to seem weird because, most people are like, wow, I wish I could do that. Or no, you don't really, it's not healthy. And I'm back at that state now. I can't retire now.
Sure.
But I still have more money than most people, but there's something about a little bit of insecurity that it's a healthy thing for people, and it's hard to explain, but
it's actually a pretty common, what you're describing, I think, is somewhat common experience for people in game development. Not obviously, I think most people who get into game development fail. We should say that.
Right.
Which is a sad reality of our industry as well, because there's a lot of great games out there that just never get played. But the ones that do have breakout hits, and people end up going, especially if you're an indie developer who has a breakout hit, because you go from having nothing and pouring all your savings into a game.
Super noodles.
Right. And then all of a sudden being like a millionaire. And that's a jar. I mean, I've never experienced that, but from the developers I've talked to, that's a jarring, social experiment of sorts that, I think a lot of us, and in the church especially, we can be really, almost kind of holier than thou, I guess is the best way to put it. When it comes to that kind of thing, we're like, oh, well, if I ever get a lot of money, I'll just be super generous. But then then if you've never had that experience, it's really
hard to actually speak to. Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. I remember I had a pastor once tell this story, and I'm sure every pastor's probably told this, but he said, he had a business friend who called him and wanted to go out to lunch. So he went out to lunch with him, and the business friend said, hey, look, I'm getting started in this business. It's this big thing. It's a really big deal. And I just want you to know that if I hit it big, I'm going to give a large portion of this, like a percentage, like a 10% thing of what comes into this business. I'm going to give it to the church. And the pastor said, he asked him, well, do you give 10% of what you make now to the church? And the guy said, no. And the pastor said, well, I doubt seriously that you'll ever
Yeah.
that you hit big. And as funny as that is, and how we all go, oh, well, that's not true. No, that totally is true. That really does hit home, because you feel like, oh, if I had $1 million, then, oh, well,
then I'd have enough. Yeah.
Right. But suddenly, if you have $1 million, your sense of value skews in weird ways where you could easily give 100, but then somehow in your mind, well, that's not really valuable because I have $1 million, so 100 is really not enough. I need to find something I can give more to. And you miss small opportunities. And at the same time, then you're so busy looking for where to put the big money that you end up just not doing it. Well, where am I going to put 10% of $1 million? Who's the lucky person who's going to get that? And then, you're so busy filtering through that you end up just not doing anything, and you miss a guy on the street who's going hungry because you didn't give him $10, and you don't ever give your 100,000 because it's so hard to find somebody who you should give that to. And so it stagnates you, and it's a really weird phenomenon.
Yeah. The reason why I wanted to ask about success in general is because for me, I'm just starting up my business. I'm just not starting up, but I mean, I've been doing it for about 2 years now, and I process success way more negatively than I thought that I would. Like I just thought that it would be this sweet. I just got this project. It got a ton of attention. It's this trailer is going everywhere and blah blah blah. And it's like when that happens, I'm like, oh, now what? It's like this like weird depression sets in, and I'm wondering if that was something that you had faced. And I'm wondering like how you've managed to go from this extreme success of MYST to other successes, but also still being able to stay around even after the disorientation of success.
Well, I mean, if there's one thing that is probably abnormal with my story, it's the extreme amount of success of MYST. I mean, that just doesn't happen to people that they get a best-selling game and it's the number one seller of whatever for a while. That's just weird. And so I remember thinking, and this has helped me stay healthy to a certain extent. I remember thinking, okay, well, I mean, I don't know how you top this, and I really don't care if I do. I shouldn't expect to. I'm gonna try and do some fun stuff and see what I can do and build some more cool things. But I should just be happy now. I mean, I kind of got something really cool here that happened and may not happen again. So I had that going. I felt like I got to the top quick enough where it felt like, well, if it's all downhill from here, at least you got up there at some point. So my story is probably a little bit different than what most people would experience. But it did take years to get up there. I mean, most people think, oh, they did MYST and it was an overnight success, but really it was more like 15 years, some of which included companies we were working with going bankrupt and not sending us any money, and some of it living at my parents, and some of it, getting food stamps, and so it was
before the breakout success or after.
No, before the breakout.
Yeah.
It was I worked at a bank
years in the making,
but after we started doing games, full time. It was just so many crazy things happened that we just kept picking ourselves up by our bootstraps and saying, well, let's try again. And
that's
so
super important. Yeah. I mean, I remember as soon as like Indie Game the movie came out, everyone's like, oh, these guys, this Edmund McMillan guy, he just made this Super Meat Boy game and he just became a millionaire. And that's far from the truth. He was making games for like 10, 15 years before that too.
Yeah, it's far from the truth. And I'll tell you, one of the keys to success is failure. If you don't expect to fail and have a plan for, well, if I fail, I'll do this, or if this doesn't, I'll try and do this, then you're just going to get depressed because you will fail. And failure is part of life. And it's just what happens, and you've got to learn from it. And it's like, getting the answer wrong on a test. If that crushes you, well, then I don't think you've learned anything, And on the other hand, if you get it wrong and then go, well, wait, what is the answer? Well, then you may have learned something.
Yeah.
But here's another thing, and this probably flies in the face of of traditional Christianity as well. I look at that success, and it's easy for the world at large to attribute that to, oh well, Robin and Rand, my brother and I, oh, they're smart and they did good work, and so they were successful. And to a certain extent, I think probably I thought that we worked hard, we climbed up this mountain and we made it. At the beginning, I think I thought that. Well, the other way is to think, oh well, God blessed them and God did this for them, and whatever reason. Honestly, I don't think now, in my old gray-haired age, I don't think either one of those is true. I think that life is full of randomness and chaos, and from what I can see of things happening, it's similar, frankly, to I don't know, the way it's been since some of the Psalms I read, where it's like, how come good things happen to bad people and bad things happen to good people? And the only way I look at that is because random stuff happens, and it's not that we're geniuses, and it's not that we always manage to make these incredibly perfect decisions. There's a lot of chance. There's a lot of smart people who've done a lot of amazing things and never got recognition
it seems like a lot of it's like the right place at the right time too. Because I mean, like, there's so many games out there that are doing some amazing things, but because the market's so saturated, there's not they can't stand out.
Sure. And that's I think that's one of the things. I remember hearing the story about Google wanting to sell to Yahoo for $1 million early on in their history, and Yahoo turning them down. Yahoo saying, nah, you're probably not worth that. I'm thinking to myself, well, there's a lot of lessons to be learned here, but the number one lesson is that the guys who started Google didn't have a clue how much they were worth or where they were going. And in essence, they essentially lucked out by the fact that Yahoo turned them down. So to think that they're geniuses, it's like, no, kind of the chaos of this life kind of rolled in your direction in that particular case. So
I think what you're saying does kind of play into one of the truths of like a traditional Christian worldview, because, well, and I think we can so think about the sovereignty or the grace of God as this meticulous thing, which it is. Like well, at least I think that God is meticulously sovereign, like he's in control over all things, but that doesn't change the fact that we do live in like a frustrating, broken system, right? Where people aren't. One of the realities I think you have to kind of accept, or I struggle to accept as a Christian, is that reality that like things are not going to go well, or like I'm not going to be justly rewarded for my diligence all the time, right? Like, and it may or may not have something to do with my effort or my ideals or my values. I may have all those things right, or I may have them completely wrong, and that's the challenge of faith, I think, to some degree.
Yeah. I mean, the sovereignty of God's a really interesting one to me, because obviously I was raised with that, and it means different things.
Can you define that for yourself, Rand? Because I think that for our listeners, that's something that we need to know, because I don't even always know what someone's talking about when they say that.
Yeah, no, that's good. For me, there's different levels of this, because I've heard it in many different ways, but let's just take the extreme case, is that God is in control. I mean, it's just a simple way of saying that basically he is in control of everything. And that one is really interesting to me, because I am definitely not a deterministic kind of. I don't have a deterministic attitude. I'm not a predestination guy. I was raised that way and didn't have any problem with it at first, but now I start to look at things and granted, I may be looking at things in a simple way, but it feels like the older I get, the more I want to feel that way. And I look at things that people say God is in control, and I say, well, I don't know if I think God's in control of that. And I can't say why I think he isn't, but I see aspects of the world around me that I think, well, all I want to know is that God weeps with me at some of these things. And
Yeah.
and I would love, it's reassuring in some ways for me, and this is going to sound really weird, and
Go for it.
it's not that I want to insult anybody, but it's reassuring to me sometimes if I think God's not in control. Because when some things happen, and some things I understand are bigger than me, and I don't know, it's possible that God has this outlook of time and knows the future and all those things that are very traditional Christian
Sure.
doctrinal things that whatever. But I'll tell you, there are some things, some amounts of suffering that people go through that it's very reassuring to me, for me to think that God's not in control and that He's saying, look, this is out of my control and I'm weeping here for what's happening and I want you to help here as best you can.
Yeah.
And that both inspires me to do something rather than just pray, God help that person. And it makes me think, okay, I can't blame God, for certain things either. Anyway, we could go down that rabbit hole quite a bit.
That's actually really valuable, considering the nature of game design is so much about agency. Like this year we played Inside. I believe Drew you played Inside, right?
No, I haven't gotten to it.
Okay, maybe it was just me then. Rand, did you play Inside?
No, I didn't.
Okay, so Inside deals with this question of like very much about control. In terms of very early in the game, there's this moment where you're being chased by things and you have to jump, and there's no evidence that what you're jumping into is safe. You just have all these things coming after you, and so you have to trust the game designer at that point to jump. And so it's constantly doing a lot of these kind of like trust fall experiences where it's causing you to trust that whoever made this experience ultimately has your back. Right. And it does something very interesting with that towards the end. But that makes me think a lot about your games and a lot about game design in general. This aspect of we have to trust the creator of this experience to some degree. And when you're making a game, you have this big question of like, well, I don't know that I trust myself to make this right. So it's weird because it's kind of like playing God. And you made MYST, and I can't say that I have to admit I've cheated. I've read the wiki and stuff like that with the story. And so we're dealing with a 20 plus year old game, which that's awesome, by the way. So spoilers, there's worlds within worlds, and you're dealing with a subject of actually like going into worlds and generating those worlds, and essentially like characters in the game playing God, right?
Yeah, the kind of the story behind the simple part of the game itself is fairly simple, but the narrative behind it is that there was these people that essentially had the ability to write books that would go to other worlds, and it was so it was a godlike power, and in a lot of ways it was reflective of what we were doing as game designers as well. We were writing worlds and letting people explore them. And the whole thing in my mind, I look at all of life very much from a game designer perspective, obviously, because it's my filter. It's what I've done for so long. And I keep thinking logically that way. I probably do this to a fault, because, I think of everything as a layer down. I'm seriously have started writing a book about this, where essentially we're God and the game is the creation, and going into some pretty in-depth, interesting stuff in it. But it makes me think of God in a human way, for better or worse. But I like it that way. I'm real satisfied with that, and I think it's intriguing. I remember doing the massively multiplayer game we were doing, like MYST Online, and there were so many weird parallels with. It was just the weirdest thing, because we were building this game, and yet we were making modes where we could watch people, and they could do what they wanted. Really, they had complete freedom. We couldn't control it, but there were limits to what they could do, and it just messes with your head. Like, wow, this is a lot like life. In weird ways. So
yeah, well, it's interesting what you said about like finding some sense of comfort in God not being in the idea of God not being in control, because we're recording this anyway in the early days of December, and so it's that time of year when we start thinking about Christmas, about the incarnation, about Advent, which is this idea that I don't know that it's about God not being in control, but it's certainly about God
wanting him to show up so that what's not right will be made right.
Yeah. It's about God caring about our broken lives.
Right.
About what's wrong. Yeah.
No, it's true. And the way so even going back to the Old Testament, which, I again, in my evolution, maybe away from literal interpretation of certain things, I don't at this point in life think that the truth of those stories that's important. It's the truth that I get out of them and inspires me that is more important. But if I look at those things, it seems like to me that the truth that comes out of a lot of the Old Testament is God's mind was changeable, and God had to redo things, and God was always trying to inject things to try and
like when Abraham is trying to get God to go back to Sodom and Gomorrah, whether or not there was a righteous person there. There's a conversation there. There's not like this is what's going to happen, and that same scenario happens with Moses. Same thing happens with David.
Even with Noah. I mean, imagine you build this thing, and then all of a sudden it kind of goes upside down. Well, a sovereign God would have known that would have happened, and then had to destroy all those people in the flood. And it's like, well, okay, that implies to me that at least some of the truth there could be that, well, stuff happens. And anyway, so I'm very comfortable in that from a biblical perspective, and I don't think it's that heretical in any way. It doesn't fit with my upbringing, but I'm okay with that.
Yeah. Well, your upbringing seems to be a lot more oriented these days towards being in the game development world, and that just obviously changes the way that you see reality in a lot of ways. Can you think of particular ways that your spiritual formation has shifted because of game design, besides the ones that we've already talked about? But are there other particular ways that you can think of?
Let's see here. I know that these probably aren't specific from game design, but I know that part of game design it's always influenced by exploring. Like even, this in particular, we brought this up, the idea that these people write books and that it takes them to other places. That all kind of comes out of this interest in quantum mechanics and how there seems to be multiple pathways, probability waves as you go forward. And we don't want to go into all that, but I remember in MYST thinking, as we were going down some of those paths, thinking how awesome of a system that is from if I was building worlds, the whole idea that I'm going to build I'll give you the parallel. The quantum nature of reality, one of the interpretations is that things aren't real till we look at them. That basically, and I'm not making that. That sounds like it's some kind of metaphysics and weirdness, but it's not. That is actually a valid scientific interpretation of quantum experimentation. Okay, that the moon is not there unless somebody looks at it, and basically the wave function collapses and waves become particles when there's an observer. Now, you can wiggle who an observer is and where that all plays out, but in my mind, those things are perfect. That's the perfect way to build an efficient world. And from a game designer perspective, it's awesome because if somebody's not looking at something in a game, I don't want to have to render it. I don't want to put it on a screen.
Yeah.
It's like inefficient way to do things. So I sometimes, and granted, I'm in that mindset, and I'm no doubt I've been skewed down certain directions because I live in that world. But I look at the quantum nature of the universe, and I think, well, this is a really cool evidence that something planned this, that there's something behind this, that there's more than this, that there's, it didn't just start randomly at the Big Bang, but there's a process and a goal in mind here. And I think that's really cool.
Yeah. Cool. That's awesome.
Can we ask a few more questions about your personal life? You married? You have family?
I do. I've got, I have 3 daughters, married, and I'm actually remarried, divorced and remarried, which is a whole other story. Yeah. And my wife also has 2 daughters, so we are flush with daughters between the 2 of us.
Oh, wow. So how has being a dad influenced the work that you do?
That's what kind of got us started. I remember getting my first computer. Well, I mean, my first computer, you guys wouldn't even call it a computer, but it was a computer to me. But I remember getting, then after that, I think it was I got a Macintosh when they came out. And I remember looking for software for my daughter, who was really young at that time. It was like, okay, I want to get some cool games for her that she could use this mouse and do some stuff. And I remember looking at the games and buying them or trying them and thinking, oh, well, this is crap. I mean, if you can't do real games, you make kids games because, people will buy it. And that's when I wrote my brother a letter and said, we should do something better for kids. And he's a really talented artist and musician. And he started kind of drawing. We had an idea, and it basically became our first game. And it was a world. It wasn't a game. It really kind of set our path as we moved forward to making places more
as
than
a world builder.
Games. Yeah, exactly.
So what did you feel like was primarily missing in those games that you played that you didn't care for with your children?
It just felt like nobody cared. Like they were thrown together, and I don't want to say this wrong, but different people have different skill sets, and sometimes the game looked like it was half done. Like there was probably a very talented programmer who did a game, but he didn't ever connect with an artist who could kind of fill it out and do something that made it look good. And the analogy is to children's books. When you get a good children's book, it probably has a writer who did one thing and somebody who drew the pictures in it. But when it's the right combination of those things, an adult enjoys reading it just as much as a kid. It's there's certain children's books that you go, oh yeah, I'll read you that one. Bring it. Yeah, that's great. And there's certain ones you kind of go, ugh, not this one again. And it felt like all of the children's games at the time were like, ugh, not this one again. Nobody's put any thought into this one. Kind of approached it that way. Like, well, we should put a little more thought into it. And it was a game called The Manhole. And if you look back now at it, it's very simplistic and very trivial, but it definitely stood out a bit at the time, I think, because we made a little more effort. It didn't make us rich, but it set us on our path.
That's awesome. Cool. And so now you have many daughters, and that formed your early development days. Do you have any grandkids now?
Yes. Got actually 4 grandkids, 3 boys and a girl. And the boys they just want to make games all the time.
Oh, yeah.
Grandpa, let's make a game. Let's make a game. Oh, you guys don't know what you're getting into.
That's funny. Well, I think, we're all natural game designers. Like, we're born that way. It's one of the first things that kids learn to do is to make games with each other. Like, and I don't mean like computer games, obviously, but just, games on the playground.
Trying to come up with ways to make the rules more fun for everybody. And
that's been one of the funnest things for me as someone who's just I'm not a game designer, but I'm a critic. and as a game critic who's just fascinated by game design, is watching my children develop their own rules and systems and things in the way that they play with each other.
Oh yeah,
blast.
yeah. No, it's something inherent in us, and I think it has to do with, from my point of view, there's a lot of aspects of us as humans that it's the same reason a little puppy bites things. It's like he's practicing things that are part of the genetic makeup that become part of his world later, or will serve him well later. And I think to a weird extent, some of those things don't serve us anymore. We don't hunt anymore for our food, and we don't, we gather at the supermarket, and our challenges aren't in outsmarting a wildebeest. It's, but we still have those same desires, and and also there's this really cool desire to explore. We always wonder what's around the next corner. I mean, whether the next corner honestly is the corner at Disneyland or it's life itself. I mean, there's just a real strong pull to turn that corner and look and see what's there, and it drives us forward, whether it's life or games.
Yeah, that discovery element.
Yeah, that's cool.
If I can ask one last question from me, and if Drew has any other questions, he can ask those. But the thing that I really, really want to know from you is what would you say has kept you around game development? How do I frame this? What advice would you have for anybody who wants to stick around for 20, 30 years in game development like you have?
Oh, man. Boy, oh boy. Well, be prepared to fail, and be prepared to have to deal with. I mean, oh man, the disappointments and failures we've had. Some of them have been like massively epic. Like,
can you give an example?
Well, the biggest one. I mean, we've had numerous companies go bankrupt right around us, or just stop paying us, or just renege. And when you're small, you just kind of have to go with that. I mean, if you're an uptight person, it's going to make you crazy. So you should just go to Starbucks and become a barista. But the biggest one, I think, was we did the online version of MYST, and we poured everything. I mean, that's where all of our resources, money-wise and everything, went into. And the thought behind it was, well, if people like exploring worlds, this thing called broadband is coming. Why don't we make something where the worlds never end, where you can just keep exploring, and every night when you come back, something has changed a little, and you can do it with a few of your friends.
And this was 2002?
Yeah, this was right after Riven. We kind of started on this. So it was... It had been in development for years, and it was a massive undertaking. We bought another company to do the 3D engine and the online engine, and it was incredible. But what it meant is that we had to also build out content long into the future, and we had to set up staging where, okay, we need to have content so that every month, there's something exciting that pulls people back in. And we had two companies that both said, yes, we want this. Both of them very large. And we had to make a choice who we were going to go with. And we made the choice. And I remember having a conversation with one of the executives saying, hey, we just want you to give this a try. This is new. Nobody's done this before, this type of entertainment. But if we can run this for a year, let's see what happens. And they said, sure. And they ended up canceling it before it even launched. And that was huge because we had nothing left. We had spent everything we had to get us to that point. And we realized at that point that the company didn't really want to do online. They sold all their online stuff, and their intent was just basically to kind of get another game out there and make a little money. We had poured everything into it. We had no reserves, and we had to somehow try and recover from that. And that was tough. And you can't harbor bitterness, and you can't, you just have to figure. It's problem solving. You got to figure out how to move on. And I think, again, it's probably first world problem. Life itself is that way. It throws crazy wrenches at you, and if you're just gonna collapse in a heap, you're you're not going to do very well. You got to figure out, well, what's next? What's tomorrow? What do I
And
do?
so when did that all collide? When did that all come to I guess failure?
Yeah, it was the early 2000s. I'm not sure the exact year. It's
Okay.
probably well documented in Wikipedia.
Sure.
Wikipedia, but
Yeah.
it all happened then, and we tried to reboot, tried to scrape together what we could. We actually did some stuff for that company because we didn't have any chance to do anything else. We had the entire year's worth of content that we were going to roll into this online game, and it was just sitting there. And they said, well, you should make expansion packs for this game. And we said, well, okay, we have nothing else to do with this, so we will. Some of it for basically free, but it kept us working, and we kind of shrunk in size, and then we started getting into the mobile market, which was interesting, putting MYST on a phone, which you realize you're living in the future, or that you're old when that happens. And, but it kind of that was just a breath. It was a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel when that happened. It's like, okay, well, let's try this. And then we converted other projects, and it gives a little bit of money. And then we, it brought us to the Kickstarter for Abduction, where there was some guys who had worked here a while, and there were some guys who were ex-employees who said, we should try something bigger again, and we should try this Kickstarter thing to do it. And that led to Abduction. So once again, it felt like, the ebb and flow, but we were able to kind of rise from it and get over the failures and try something new. And Abduction was born.
So what have been some of the biggest successes of Abduction? And I've seen some really great press around it, but what have been some of the highlights of releasing that game for you?
Well, it was, in some ways, it was nice validation. It's easy to be a one-hit wonder, and we did MYST and Riven. It's true, but Riven was, basically had a lot of money behind it, all the MYST money world behind it, and it was a beautiful thing, and but it was a sequel. Well, here's a chance to do a completely new IP, something that's not related to MYST. It can't hang on those coattails. It's a new storyline, and it's years later, and it's new technology, and we're trying to give people that same feeling they had when they played MYST, which is of truly being in a different place, building a world that felt consistent and complete and immersive and all those same things. Can we do that? This is a different group of people. Very few, if any of the people were the same, one or two. And so it was nice to say, let's try this again, starting from scratch, starting with a blank sheet of paper, and give people that same feeling. And I think the best, even, no matter what Abduction does, the reviews that came out and said, oh my gosh, they did it again. I remember, this brought me back to those feelings I had when I played MYST and Riven. Those were the most satisfying reviews, because it feels like, okay, cool, we did it. It was a scrappy thing. A lot of people think that was a lot of money for what we built. It was not a lot of money. We had a real dedicated amount of people, and it just felt good to kind of
come together,
build something new and fresh. Yeah,
man, that's awesome. That's cool. And I heard that it's a really thinky game, one that really challenges you to think and process all the details around you. And I heard that there's even a puzzle that involves math. Is that true?
Well, we've had various puzzles that you need a little bit of math here and there. The one that's in Abduction, you can get through it, or mostly through it with some trial and error. You just have to understand some aspects of it. I think for the deeper people who want to go a little deeper, there's some cool math to it that will serve you well and make things make a little more sense. But we tried to make it also that you could kind of stumble your way through it with a little
Cheese
more.
Your way through.
Yeah. But
that's how I would pass it.
I button mashed my way through Resident Evil, so.
Well, and to be honest with you, we do look at our games as if they're real and there's systems behind it. I don't know whether this is from me thinking that there's stuff behind
every corner
this world, that I just find it hard to believe that this is it. There's more than this, I feel like I'm open-minded in thinking there's more than this. And that makes me think that, there's that the intricacies of the systems and things are satisfying and interesting. And I think some of that inspires us to do that same thing in our games. And so, there's a little bit of thinking that but it all kind of reveals deeper things. Once you solve something, it connects the dots, and you go, "Oh my gosh, I didn't even realize this. This is connected to this, and I see where the story plays in now." And the thing I saw at the beginning that just seemed like it was this random thing at the beginning, now I know what that was. I love that.
That's fantastic. Yeah, good gestalt, as they call it.
Yeah.
Well, that's a good note to end on. I think there's a lot of hope in what you just said, which is what we're trying to celebrate. I think around this time of year is the idea of hope. Anyway, but it's been a joy to talk to you, Rand.
Yeah, Rand, thank you so much for entertaining all my questions and just being a guest on the show and being so open to share your life.
No, this was fun. It felt like it went really fast. I'm sure we could, multi-hour long sessions on all this, but it feels that way with a lot of the deeper things in life. They're kind of worth talking about. It's all part of, individual journeys. So it's nice to kind of be able to share the story.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, well, maybe we can have you on again to dig even deeper. That would be awesome. So
that'd be fun. Appreciate it, you guys.
Cool. Well, awesome. Where can people find you online?
So our company is Cyan, Cyan, and that's probably the best place to learn about us. Abduction with an O is the latest game, and if you want to explore and it's probably the best way to find out about me is play the game. You'll get some insight into my warped personality. So abduction.com has more details on that. But
are you on Twitter? You are on Twitter, I think.
I am on Twitter. I am Random Tweets. It's RANDEM Tweets.
Yeah. Okay. Cool.
I'm following you now.
I'm Drew Dixon 82 on Twitter. Josh, you're M Joshua. And then, I just want to say thank you to our listeners. If you enjoyed the podcast, please spread the word on Twitter, Facebook, and especially on iTunes by rating and reviewing us. You can send any feedback or questions about the podcast. And that's it for us. Thanks again, Rand.